Hello. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Rick Harnish. I'm the Executive Director of the High Speed Rail Alliance. And we thank you all for coming today. And for those who are on the call who are members, thank you very much. So we are a member-supported organization. We're working to reconnect America with fast, frequent, and affordable trains. And we help people understand what great American trains can be, what steps can be taken to make them a reality for your community, and then give you the tools and resources you need in order to educate your state leaders and federal leaders about what steps they can take to make it a reality so that we can all have great trains. One of the most important infrastructure issues around having high-speed and regional rail is Penn Station. It's a super important issue, and it's also a difficult issue. So there are lots of discussions about what we need to do to fix it. So we're really excited to have our second presentation on ideas of what needs to happen there today. And Chris, if you'd be happy to, or be willing and able to introduce our speakers.
I'm happy, very happy to do that. And I'm Chris Ott, the Deputy Director of the High Speed Rail Alliance. But more importantly, let me introduce our speakers today. Starting with Karim Ahmed, who is a Senior Technical Advisor to Rethink Inc. NYC, a transportation, education, and advocacy not-for-profit. He is a co-founder and principal of Reform Architecture based in the Bronx. He is a part-time faculty member at the Parsons School of Design at the New School, where he was a 2020 faculty fellow at the Urban Systems Lab. Karim graduated from the Cooper Union with a Bachelor of Architecture in 2013. He is a registered architect in the state of New York and a member of the American Institute of Architects Bronx chapter. Also with us today, Dr. Robert Paswell is a distinguished professor of civil engineering emeritus and director emeritus of the University Transportation Research Center at the City College of New York. He has been active in research and management in the transportation field, including founding and directing centers at the University of Buffalo, the University of Illinois Chicago, and the City University of New York. He has had major management positions, including executive director of the Chicago Transit Authority, and his awards include Distinguished Member of the American Society of Civil Engineers. He has led many studies for transit agencies and other government bodies. And third, Samuel Turvey is chairperson of Rethink Inc. or Rethink NYC. Sorry if I got that wrong earlier. Rethink NYC, a transportation, education, and advocacy nonprofit. Turvey is a longtime community activist and board member in the not-for-profit community. He recently retired from TIAA, where he served as a managing director in the firm's legal department, and he continues to provide consulting services to the financial services industry. Advocacy came to Sam early. During the 60s, Sam participated in protests and rallies to save Staten Island's greenbelt from expressways that Robert Moses wanted to link to the newly opened Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and that effort was successful. Sam is a native of Staten Island, who has lived and worked in each of New York City's 5 boroughs, and he has commuted widely throughout the region as well. For members of our audience, thank you all for being here today. If you have a comment, you can put it in the chat. Please also feel free to share where you're joining us from today if you'd like to do that in the chat. And if you have questions, it helps to keep those separate, so please use Zoom's Q&A feature for questions. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can after the main presentation. With that, please take it away.
Thank you. Sam Turvey, we are delighted to have been invited to present to the High Speed Rail Alliance, and we really look forward to talking to you about through running and to Penn Station. We will bring up a PowerPoint presentation that we will make available to you in any number of ways. But what we'd like to talk about today is unifying regional commuter rail via through running at New York Penn Station in the first half of this century. And the first thing I need to say is we mean it when we say first half. There are a lot of people who say that they love through running, but if you really talk to them, they're talking about it at the beginning of the 22nd century. And we don't really consider that an appropriate response, frankly. We think this is something that the rest of the world is doing, more of this country is doing, and we really need to figure out how to do it now for many of the reasons we'll discuss. But just for openers on our next slide, I know many of you are experienced rail people and know plenty about through running, but I just thought it'd be good to quickly go through and say through running happens when commuter trains run through a center city location to centers of business activity on either side of the city, somewhat like the way the Bronx runs through Manhattan and on out to Brooklyn. In contrast, the graph you see on the right at top is more like a terminal station, or is a terminal station. That is generically the way Grand Central Terminal looks. The trains come in, they stop, they go back north. But Penn Station, for all the animosity that many of us show to it, actually is configured as a through running station, and its track plane looks very much like the generic diagram on the bottom. Through running trains, through running tracks provide more efficient operations and can handle a greater number of trains per hour than terminal tracks. And it's one of the reasons they're highly favored in our own Federal Rail Administration guidelines. And the reasons for that, or they're not trains going back out the left end of the station after dropping passengers off and cutting off trains coming in and all variants thereon. It's much easier to get people on and off trains and off in their merry way. In our next slide, we scheduled this thing, and Rethink had a little thank you party for some of our constituents, and a funny thing happened on the way to this forum. But newly appointed Penn Station lead Andy Byford dropped by and made some opening remarks that I'm sure many of you have read about. And it was really welcome because there are a lot of different constituencies in Penn Station, and we actually at Rethink are part of a bigger group, an Empire Station Coalition, with 15 very important civic and neighborhood organizations. And it was refreshing to have Andy drop by and spend a little time with us, but it wasn't all fun and merriment, notwithstanding how this picture looks. On the next slide, you'll see some things that Andy said. First of all, he takes his new charge where some had spoken in a segmented way about Penn reconstruction and Penn expansion separately, and Gateway separately still, and a general project plan separately. Andy said, my job is transformation. We're going to create a great train station. It's going to be transformative. He also brought some other pieces of news that we'll discuss that I think are important. The Federal Railway Administration is going to be conducting an independent review of how trains belonging to both Amtrak and commuter railroads, run in and out of the station to see whether it's really necessary to physically expand the station to the south of Penn Station, which, as many of you know, would require demolition of a healthy part of a vibrant neighborhood. Andy isn't the only person saying this, although we have every reason to believe him. The FRA spoke to Mike Oreskes, one of the journalists who frequently covers this story, and characterized the independent study as an independent service optimization study for New York Penn. So, in looking at this, and we'll talk some more about it on our next slide, there's some points that I think we should discuss first. What's the independent review all about? The railroads have said, unless you can get to 48 trains per hour with your plans for Penn Station, 48 trains per hour under the Hudson, we really don't want to talk to you. This is where commuter demand is going to go, and this has to happen. And the railroads have done some of their own reports, which we have found lacking and disappointing in a number of ways we can get into. But I just want to start right out of the gate and say we believe that a fair review of Rethink New York City's plans will show that we can get to at least 48 trains per hour using through running under the Hudson, and likely more. We are doubtful that the railroad's terminal track model can accomplish this unless they add even more inefficient terminal tracks to an already bad plan, which likely will require taking even more of the property adjacent to the station. When terminal tracks, which create all these crossing return patterns, are utilized, it really is the original 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 step back equation. And I think it's important, while the railroads have made a big stink to date, Andy Byford hasn't said any of this, but to date made a big stink and suggested we can't get to 48 trains per hour under the Hudson River. they haven't come up with their own plan to get to 48 trains per hour under the Hudson River, and they've been working on this for years. What we think is incredibly important, and the most disappointing thing we find about some of their opposition research reports to through running, is that they have not performed a dynamic railroad traffic controller model simulations for their plans or ours, and we confirmed this with a Freedom of Information request. FX Collaborative and WSP have not used this software in their reports, and frankly, this is truly inexplicable. These are things that the railroads and their consultants use every day. Using less effective capacity technologies, the railroads have assigned our plan various capacity numbers. 3 years ago, it was 35 trains. In March of 2024, it was 42 trains. In an informal meeting with Karim, it was 44 to 46 trains. Then they had a big public meeting with a lot of press, and they suggested we could get 38 trains. By October, when they finalized that report, they said 40 trains. And then again, less formally with the Station Working Advisory Group in the fall, they suggested we could get to 48 trains peak, but we couldn't provide a one-seat ride to Port Jervis reverse peak, and therefore they were going to discount us. These self-serving caveats and no explanation for why RTC modeling is or is not being utilized, we find really troubling, and so we're really glad that the FRA is coming in. In our next slide, there are a few more points we make. And one is the railroad's plans to date do nothing about widening Penn Station's barely legal, perilously narrow train platforms. Now, this was the reason the state legislature started the whole Penn Station project in 2018 or earlier. And what we hear from many is we love through running, just not in our lifetime. And it is suggested that what we really should do is build a terminal south of the station, but do so in a way that we can later implement through running or some style of regional metro rail by running 2 tunnels or more through Manhattan to the East River, have at least 2 new East River tunnels, and then we can have through running. We're really all in agreement. Through running is great. I call this through running denial. This is not something that we should wait until the 22nd century to have. The implications for New York, competitive and otherwise, are too great. So in our next slide, why do we care? This is about a lot more than 48 trains per hour. Implementing through running at Penn Station, while a transit solution will all but immediately benefit many, including our 400,000 cross-regional commuters. That number came from the Effective Transit Alliance and some of the excellent work that they do. But we would tell you that for reasons we're going to get into briefly, and we'll be expanding on this in the months to come, this is likely the most important land use decision we will make in this century in the New York region. It needs to be treated this way. So why do I say that? We'll start on the next slide and say we've wanted a regional transit plan for over 100 years, although again, some recommend we wait another 100 years. This is a 1927 map from the Regional Plan Association. And, you know, I barely say this tongue in cheek. How many centuries must a regional plan be deferred? The answer is blowing in the wind. The gateway tunnels, whereby 4 New Jersey Hudson River tunnels will now be symmetrical with 4 existing East River tunnels, make unifying our regional rail eminently doable, as Thameslink did in London, and all the success they've had there. Do we really want to defer that to the next century? So where did we wind up after this 1927 document? Well, instead we got Moses, Robert, and monocentricity. And go back to the next slide, Kareem. You know, a monocentric region, Robert Moses came in, our transit thinking, or at least infrastructure, has stayed pretty stagnant with everything terminating at Manhattan. And what we're talking about with through running is creating the ability to really energize our outlying centers of business activity. And this can happen with through running at Penn Station. Trains from Long Island will run out to New Jersey, from New Jersey will run to Long Island, and there are various levels of connectivity that can happen from there. And what does this mean? In our next slide, you know, we can't say this enough. We've grazed this in the past, but we really want to start focusing on it. There's an affordability crisis in the region. And if we're serious about attacking it, through running at Penn Station is needed. Some people are very upset that this person, Mondami, won the election in New York City. I'm not here to comment on that. but he surprised the world by raising affordability. And in many respects, he's right. And it's not just in New York City, it's nationally. But through running at Penn Station will enable the region's evolution from a monocentric structure dependent on an overburdened midtown to a more resilient polycentric model. And by integrating all our commuter lines, the project will grant key hubs along the Northeast Corridor, particularly Newark and Western Queens. It will give them unprecedented access to the entire regional labor market. This shift will distribute economic activity more evenly, fostering lower costs in many parts of the region and relieving immense pressure on Midtown. A greater range of companies will be able to stay in the region instead of leaving, as many have. And it goes further in the next slide. The high-capacity polycentric model, a proven strategy in global cities like London and Paris, also provides the foundation to vastly expand the region's housing stock. Polycentric cities can absorb population growth by increasing the supply of desirable, transit-connected housing across multiple city centers. By expanding economic and demographic capacity, the region's affordability crisis can be contained and a vicious inflationary cycle can be replaced with benign growth. Now, what's this mean other than the generics? In the next slide, you'll see. Well, this is the opposite of what we'd like to see. Given all this, do you terminate a neighborhood with inefficient terminal tracks and create 3 stations in one so each railroad has their own sandbox? We're told that this expansion is necessary in order to get to 48 trains per hour. We don't think the expansion is necessary to accomplish that. We think through running within the footprint of Penn Station can accomplish that. Mind you, the expansion to the south is now opposed by Governor Hochul, New York Assembly Member Tony Simone, New York City Council Member Eric Botcher, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, and New York State Senator Brad Hoylman. A very prominent state senator in New York, Leroy Comrie, is also a tremendous advocate for through running. Mercifully, Jano Lieber of the MTA recently expressed interest in exploring through running options, and of course, Andy Byford will be evaluating it fairly as well. So what else does this look like? Well, in the through running track plan, you will see that counterintuitively in our next slide, that we would go from multiple tracks down to 12 tracks on the right. And you might say, how could that possibly happen? You're putting more capacity into Penn Station. How can that work? Well, it works all over the world. And there are many stations that have fewer tracks than Penn Station and are able to process more trains. In Penn Station here, we would widen the platforms, which adds a great amount of vertical circulation. It's safer, it's better. Trains can get in and out more quickly. And, you know, the sort of nightmare experience somebody my size frequently has in Penn Station of trying to get around one of the verticals with about 1.5 feet doesn't have to happen. So we think this would be the way to go. It can be accomplished in large part by there's a rail mail platform on the upper left that if that's removed, you can move tracks 1 and 4 to the west. And all of a sudden, the whole station can access that through running fan that you saw in one of the initial slides. So what will this do for the region? In the next slide, this is the benefits comparison. It's not even close. Kareem will get to you a little bit later and show you how we can do this more cost effectively than what have been planned to date by the railroads. And what this plan will do is provide benefits broadly through the region. It will connect 20 million plus regional residents. It will provide a more equitable and sustainable growth pattern for the region, including housing starts and expanding the region's core. We're going to send the deck around so you can get to all the bullets in the future. But the Penn expansion to the south, at present, there's no terminal track plan that accomplishes 48 trains per hour. And frankly, the railroads, again, have not provided any number that their plans can achieve. I don't think this is fair to the public dialogue. What do these benefits translate to in specific? In the next slide, we will have a more effervescent region, for lack of a better word, and we can move into the 22nd century without losing New York. Manhattan will not lose out. It will remain at the epicenter of a growing region where thoughtful pan-regional development will thrive as seldom before. The unwitting race for Manhattan to become Shanghai or Dubai can come to an end, and we can create great new civic spaces marked by an enlightened urbanism in locations across the entirety of greater New York. And I can't emphasize this enough, a flood tide of economic growth, including the creation of housing, can be anticipated for the entire region. As the recently departed Nathan Silver, person who introduced me to Penn Station, author of Lost New York, rightly said, while cities must adapt if they are to remain responsive to the needs and wishes of their inhabitants, they need not change in a needless and suicidal fashion. So I'm picking the London and Paris model. I don't want us to become Shanghai or Dubai. And so what would it look like for some of our outlining areas? In the next slide, you'll see one of my favorite things is Paterson, New Jersey. Paterson, New Jersey, like many other outlying cities, universities, hospitals, corporate parks, and centers of business activity, would gain considerable economic relevance if through running were adopted. Passaic, Hackensack, Newark, Montclair, Morristown, Red Bank, Cranford, Long Island City, Jamaica, Garden City, Mineola, Port Morris, Yonkers, White Plains, Stamford, like cities and suburbs, and our airports, universities, large hospital complexes, sports and entertainment venues would all benefit greatly from through running. North Carolina's vaunted research triangle, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, would pale with what could happen if people could effectively get across our region to our many university, research, and medical facilities. It should not take 3 hours to go 20+ miles from Hackensack Meridian in New Jersey to Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn. And next, I want to turn the program over to Dr. Robert. He likes to be called Buzz Paswell.
Right.
All yours, Buzz.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you to Rick for putting this on. Can we have the first slide? I want to talk. I actually want to make, as a professor, I'll tell you, I want to make 2 big points while I'm here. One is that through running shouldn't even be talked about. It should be an integral part of planning for a new public transportation facility for New York City, a global capital at the end of the 21st and into the 22nd century. We shouldn't be talking about it. It's part of modernization. It's part of adding the internet, all the other things we need to make a station great. We should do what you can do in Tokyo. You pick up your phone, you want to ride the Shinkansen, you find the time, you find what track it's leaving from, where on the platform you'll go, you find out how you have to pay, you pay, and you go to the platform, you show your thing, and you get on the train. No thinking, just doing, because it's organized and done well. Through running is an obvious solution, and we have to, I want to reemphasize what Sam Turvey said, is this is a unique opportunity. A lot of money is going to be spent on Penn Station, and it's going to be spent now. And if we don't get it right, we're not going to say, oops, 5 years from now, can we get the money again and do it over? We have to do it right. So through running is one thing. The other thing I want to talk about is New York as a focal point for high-speed rail on the East Coast and a competitive for high-speed rail with places like London, and he mentioned Shanghai and other global capitals, global financial capitals. We have to sustain our role as a global financial capital. Next slide, please. High-speed rail is about connectivity. We'll talk about that, but right now it takes too long to go between major pairs by conventional rail compared with how quickly it takes in the European Union and in Asia. And we know our airlines are overcrowded. We know air travel is very different than rail travel. We know it's much simpler to walk into a train station, get a ticket, and get on a train without long waits, getting in line, agony, will I have a place to put my bag, everything else. So we want to get there. And we want to connect these bright lights in a way where we can travel comfortably, smoothly, and very quickly. I have an example that in England, you can go from London to Edinburgh in 4 hours. The trains average 87 miles an hour. That's high-speed rail, but it stops at stations and everything. So the total average is 87 miles an hour. Where now, if you go from New York to Chicago in 20 hours, you're averaging 38 miles an hour. the purpose of transportation investments are to move things closer together. You want to reduce the cost of travel between points A and B. That's a fundamental, and that's why you make investments. Is the world shrinking, and can I do more business, do more travel, do more sightseeing, buy more goods, travel for pleasure, travel for business? Can I go someplace in the morning and come back in the evening? It brings areas closer together. Next slide. Penn Station, to be modern and to accommodate what we think the investment should show, I mentioned it has to be modern, it has to digitalize, and it has to fully integrate intercity, which is what Amtrak does, regional, which are what the local railroads do, Long Island Railroad and New Jersey Central, and local rail, the subway systems. You should be able to go seamlessly from one to the other through station design. And through running gives us control of that, and is an obvious pattern, and our team, along with others, have found that through running is a possibility, and it's put on the table and has to be considered and has to be evaluated, along with long-standing plans that the railroads have had from I don't want to say the early 1800s, early 1900s, that they have to be willing to let loose of and put some new ideas in their head. If we add high-speed rail to the intercity part, New York then, as I said, becomes competitive with other global financial capitals, in particular Shanghai and London. We are, as you know, in a global competition with the EU and with Asia, and we New Yorkers love to think that we're the head of that competition, and we want to stay there. Next slide, please. So high-speed rail stations globally in London and the EU connect both to local rail and regional rail and to high-speed rail networks. And I've studied many examples in the European Union, and the European Union originally had high-speed rail. How do you get on high-speed rail line? This was 20 years ago. And stations clamored to be on the high-speed rail line because they knew it would create economic advantages and economic incentives. Places like Lille learned they're going to be on the high-speed rail line. They built convention centers, they built other things, and made it very easy. You can go from London to Paris to Lille in no time at all, and then maybe back the same night. Shanghai and Beijing, I just smiled because I've had the good fortune to go to China many times, and we know it's crowded. But talking about high-speed rail, Shanghai to Beijing has high-speed rail every 20 minutes. And so we're not quite there yet, but we have to think about what is New York's place, what is the role that a modern Penn Station with through running, and again, I emphasize, we shouldn't have to talk about through running. It's just part of the design of the integration of local and regional networks with intercity networks, because the traveler doesn't want to think, oh, I've got 3 networks to go across. The traveler wants to think, I'm starting from home and I'm ending in St. Louis, or I'm ending in San Francisco, or I'm ending in Boston or Washington or Albany. And how can I make that trip easy? And how can I make it quick? And if I go to places like Boston and Washington and Albany, how can I do that quickly in a day or half a day and conduct my business there? Next slide. High-speed rail, we know Acela is coming. There's no real high-speed rail, but we're getting there. Acela is getting there. And if it can maintain its 150-mile speed by improved catenaries and by improving the track, we will have that in the Northeast Corridor. And we know, next slide, I guess, has the maps on it. Okay, we know that that high-speed rail, that we know that the density of travel in the Northeast Corridor is the highest density corridor in the United States. In the EU, the mandate has come from London, from Paris, from Germany, that if you want to make a trip of 500 miles or less, you should use high-speed rail. It's too challenging to the airlines to have many, many trips to do that. You need airspace, you need good weather, you need terminal control, you need passport control, very different on high-speed rail. So we want to say we already have the demand. We know today that more people in the Washington, New York, Boston corridor, in the mode split between rail and plane, more people choose rail, Acela, or just regional rail than they do planes. So it's already shown, and Amtrak has made itself accessible and attractive to the traveler, whether it's for pleasure or for business, to do that. So let me next slide, I think. Is there a next slide for me? Okay. So I want to conclude with two things. One is we need a Penn Station that will allow 22nd century and late 21st century technology and opportunities and innovation to drive what is one of the major transportation facilities in our largest and most competitive global financial city in New York. So Penn Station must have this. It must have the opportunity to begin to introduce high-speed rail. And an integral part of that is the introduction of or the continued to build of through running. Now, I just want to change subjects completely and just say to this audience of transportation professionals, on a personal note, this is a totally personal, and Rick, you'll have to excuse me for getting slightly off subject. My good colleague and good friend, and I'm sure a dear colleague of many of yours, and perhaps someone known to many of you through his great works, Vukan Vucic, lost his wife last week. And we want to send, as a transportation community, our condolences to Vukan, and tell him that he's got many, many friends and colleagues to lean on for support. Thank you. Kareem.
Yeah, thank you, Buzz, and thank you for breaking the news. It's always hard to be the bearer of bad news. And thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Sam, as well. I will continue. My name is Kareem Ahmed. I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about some of the technical issues, and I see there's already a few questions about that in the Q&A, so I'll try to wrap up a couple answers in there as well as we get going, and we can have plenty of time for Q&A through the end of the presentation. So through running is a technology widely used today in the station. It's a little bit more specificity to speak about it more. When we say there's through running in the station, Amtrak actually does run through the station for all of its trains. And both Long Island Railroad and New Jersey Transit run a portion through Penn Station. The operative words here are whether those train movements of going through the station are revenue or non-revenue movements. So for instance, a train that is going from Washington, D.C. to Boston on the Northeast Corridor for Amtrak, that would be making a revenue to revenue movement within Penn Station. Whereas a train that's going from, say, Port Washington to Penn Station would have its last stop at Penn Station. People would get off. They would clean the train, make sure it's no one's sleeping inside, and then it would go to the West Side yards. So it's still going through the station. It's just a little bit different movement. A portion of those trains, though, go back out for a revenue to revenue move in the opposite direction. So for instance, a train going from Port Washington into the station and then back out to Port Washington. Important to note here for a few reasons. The movements of a train that go revenue to revenue, but in the opposite direction, like that Long Island Railroad train I just mentioned, that sort of movement takes the most time in the station. And so by making trains go through the station, we have much faster train movements and much more efficient operation of the station. Getting it back to high-speed rail, you can have a high-speed rail in terms of the mile per hour that you're hitting on the tracks, but if you're spending a very, very long time in the station, then you're adding lots of delays to your operations. We have a series of videos that I want to save plenty of time for question and answer. So I'm going to drop these into the chat. Oh, they are not working. The hyperlinks will not work, so that we'll have to send those out afterwards. But there is one video that I do want to share with you right now, and it's a very good video of the operations within Penn Station on a track level. Let's go.
Or a single
Pardon me. Give me 1 second. There, folks. Okay, there we go. Can we all share this? Okay.
Our single region is split by 3 transit agencies. New Jersey Transit, terminating at Penn Station and Hoboken. Long Island Railroad, also terminating at Penn Station. And Metro North, terminating at Grand Central and disconnected to the 2 other systems. Despite the fact that Penn Station has the capability to be an efficient through station, it is underutilized as a terminal for NJ Transit and LIRR, creating great inefficiencies. While there are several bottlenecks that are proposed that we'll deal with, Penn Station is most paramount. Currently, during morning rush hour, NJ Transit trains arrive into Penn Station using tracks 1 through 12 and disembark all passengers. Some of these trains continue empty to Sunnyside, Queens, where they are stored until the evening rush hour. Of the remaining trains, some pick up passengers and return to New Jersey. Any trains leaving towards New Jersey from tracks 1 through 12 have to cross with oncoming traffic. And likewise, trains entering must compete with trains departing. The Long Island Railroad uses tracks 13 through 21, with the majority of trains continuing to the West Side yards. Other trains head back to Long Island, many times blocking each other. Because of the high amount of LIRR trains that need to enter Penn Station, LIRR uses the Southeast River Tunnel as well. All these back and forth movements become even less manageable once Amtrak, using the central platforms, enters the picture. Amtrak's operation also includes service through the Empire connection to the north. The current gateway proposal would do nothing to alleviate the congestion caused by back and forth train movements. Rather, it would complicate movements further by adding 7 terminating tracks south of existing Penn Station. The construction of Penn Station South would also require the demolition of a whole Midtown block to the south of Penn. And by terminating at Penn, deny the region access to the rest of the city. A much better solution is to operate Penn Station as a through station, which is much more efficient than a terminal. The construction of the gateway tunnels would allow a symmetric flow of train traffic, with Queens-bound trains flowing only through the south half, and New Jersey-bound trains flowing through the north half of the station.
So how do we get here? We have a 10-step plan of how to change all of the platforms and tracks to effectively widen each platform and cover an adjacent track. And so I see there was one question in the Q&A about that. And so that Amtrak noted in a paper, I believe in 2003, that it wouldn't be really effective to have through running unless you had wider platforms. So we actually completely agree, and we're proposing that. In our phasing plan, another one of the questions was about the mail platform and how to recover that. because of the turns to get into the fans for the different interlockings entering and exiting the tunnels, we do need to create some additional turning radii. And part of that means effectively moving platforms 1 and 2 a little bit further west and reclaiming some of that space as platform. This is the phase 10, the final sort of phase of our phasing plan. I believe we have this in the appendix, and I think we can send it around afterwards. But ultimately, we move to creating 10 new wide platforms that will serve as for Penn Station to allow through running, and also this is a little bit of a semantics issue, but we will have some trains. We're not proposing that every single train would go from one of our Q&A was about going from Long Beach to Montclair, or Port Washington to Montclair State. Not everything would go the full length of like from a suburb to another suburb of New York. Some of them would sort of end within the 5 boroughs in New York for New Jersey bound trains, or in Secaucus for some Long Island Railroad and Metro North trains. But more or less, you would still be able to serve all of these trains here. And we're proposing to do all of this work within the boundaries of the station. This is a pretty big difference from some of the slides that you saw Sam showing earlier with the demolition of particularly Block 780, which is where the Penn South is being proposed currently by Amtrak. And also it would require some demolition to the adjacent blocks for some feasibility to reach that station. The total cost of building Penn South and then running what's been gone by different names, but is currently going by the Empire Station Complex to connect it circulation-wise to the existing Penn Station is about $17.7 billion. And that's the work that's just east of the Hudson River. I'm sorry, yeah, east of the Hudson River. The Hudson River tunnels, all of the work that happens in New Jersey to increase capacity, that's an additional $10.88 billion. This is coming from the Connect NEC 2035, which also includes some high-speed rail planning. But we are completely in support of this work that's all in gray here. That's why we gray it out. We think everything here needs to happen, and actually some other systemic improvements throughout New Jersey. It's this Penn South and Empire Station Complex that we take some issue with. In terms of the value for the budget, in 2021, the railroads issued a study showing a partial through running station. And that basically meant converting the platforms from 3 to effectively what we would call from 3 to 8 into wider platforms so they can operate with through running, and leaving those northernmost and southernmost tracks as terminal tracks. They noted that this would cost about $3 billion of work within the station, and it would give a 35% increase in service. It's important to note that that 35% increase in service, kind of getting to one of the questions about 48 trains an hour from the Hudson, it would not have gotten 48 trains an hour from across the Hudson the way that Penn South is proposed to. However, it would have increased service from Long Island. So us for Rethink, we're of the position that increasing transit capacity, we're not super attached to only increasing service in New Jersey to 48 trains an hour. We think it's also good to increase service capacity from Long Island. So including the Long Island capacity, the overall increase in service from the plan, the partial through running plan that the railroads proposed in 2021 was 35% compared to 39%, and at about half the cost. We think that we should do that extra work at the northernmost and southernmost parts of the existing Penn Station in order to get the maximum value out of that station. And so taking that $3 billion a figure that the rails provided in 2021, for about 3/5 of the station, we kind of multiplied it by 1.5 times to get through the rest of the station. So we estimate that would be about $4.5 billion. We have a series of other supplemental projects that would have to happen outside of Penn Station, outside of Midtown Manhattan entirely. Historically, in the region, we're pretty good at building infrastructure outside of Midtown Manhattan on time and on budget. The projects that are in Midtown Manhattan, those are the ones that tend to go over time and over budget. And admittedly, it's a hard place to work. It's very hard bedrock. The same thing that makes it good for skyscrapers makes it very hard for infrastructure. So we believe that even at slightly more than half the cost of doing Penn South, providing more station capacity, we also believe that this is more likely to come in on time and on budget compared to a project like East Side Access or Penn Station South, where we're doing a deep underground station. We've
Thank
had
you
a lot
for-
of, oh, sorry.
No, you
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
We've had a series of articles that we published. We call them the 10 incredibly shrinking objections, to address some of these points and clarify some of these points. A lot of them are a little too long to explain in this presentation, but we'll send links around with that so you can take a look. And Sam, did you want to elaborate a little?
Yeah, I just say, look, we have done this incredibly shrinking objection series. They are long and they're technical and they're good and they've had an impact. And we're not just in responses we've gotten from the present railroad personnel, but a lot of different engineers were and are talking to us. And so there's some real meat in these things like electrification, the 24/7 workforce flow we have now. These kind of things are in there. We will probably expand on this, but we are really hoping that the independent review will help answer some of these questions. But please do, it is in our website. We will send along the link and you can get it. We got to 8 of 10. We will get to a few more, and we will probably start a second series if we have to. It depends on how things go. But the next slide. So there's the next 8. You have a little short description of what the objections were. These are indeed mildly subversive, but sometimes to get your point across, you have to dramatize things a little. So I apologize if anybody feels we're a little too tongue-in-cheek. But let me get to the closing thoughts, which are more serious, and then we'll take some questions. The railroad's years-long effort to date to discredit through running and defer New York's once-in-a-century opportunity until the 22nd century, even as many of our peer cities are already enjoying through running's compound benefits, will only serve to further compound the tragedy that started at Penn Station in 1963, and I think most of us would agree continues to the present. Andy Byford, who we know and like and applaud his appointment, has the opportunity to reverse this continuing tragedy at New York's most important crossroads and set Penn Station and even greater New York on a better course for the 21st century and certainly the 22nd. It starts with through running at Penn Station sooner rather than later and should be capped by the revamped track. It should cap the revamped track layout with a station building worthy of what many of us still consider the greatest city on earth. And something a little more personal to me is a question I'd like to close with, and then I'll ask a question and then you can ask us questions. But next. Think of all the capital, culture, diversity, energy, geography, resilience, and talent in this region. Let's just take Paterson. Allen Ginsberg's from Paterson. The guitarist Bucky Pizzarelli is from Paterson. Bucky Pizzarelli's English teacher was Allen Ginsberg's father. Larry Doby, who some of you know is the Jackie Robinson of the American League. Reuben Hurricane Carter, some of you know from the Bob Dylan song. William Carlos Williams, the poet, and Lou Costello are all from Paterson. We are one very special region. What if we chose to harness all these energies and talents instead of ignoring them? We'll be happy to take questions, Chris.
Excellent. This was very, very great. I thank you guys so much for doing this. Thank you for doing all this work. I have, from a distance, thought about Penn Station and have frequently looked at the stuff that you put out. So I really appreciate this. Just as an aside, they're doing kind of the same bad idea down at Washington Union Station, where they're talking about putting a bunch of terminal tracks underneath the existing terminal tracks. And if you guys know people who are analyzing that, I would love to have them on.
Right.
You kind of hit on one of the top questions that immediately comes up. Boy, there's a lot of columns supporting buildings interfering with those platforms. So what happens with all those columns?
Kareem?
So, oh, sorry, Sam?
No, you go ahead.
Oh yeah. So yeah, we're a small organization. We don't have contracts with the MTA right now. So all of our documents that we've been working off have been like historical plans at Penn Station. And we don't my name is Karim Ahmed, so I can't spend too long on the platforms without drawing suspicion. And I'd like to as much as we'd like to get a little more specific, we have a level of plan where we think that we'd have to probably shore less than 100 columns. We had some feedback from the railroads, thinking that that number was probably an order of magnitude larger. We haven't gotten into the details with them. We've asked for plans, but understandably for security reasons, they can't share that. But realistically, most of these, there's no columns where the tracks are, and that's where we're proposing to expand the platforms. So the real areas where you'd have the column interference would be mainly at a few of the interlockings that we're proposing and we're identifying, and these couple of new lines of track. But even so, the proposal that the MTA modeled in 2021, their $3 billion figure for the renovation included whatever moving and shoring of columns that would have been required. So even with moving those columns, we're still at like half of the cost of building Penn South.
Rick, let
What
me.
I just say, what I would just say about that, Rick, is, you know, we did our 8 incredibly shrinking objections, and I've said many times, if you read our stuff, that no sooner did we put 8 or more of these down, they come back to us with 5 new ones. And we have been hearing about the columns a lot recently. We believe we have answers and will improve on those answers. But at a certain point, we're a small grassroots organization. We're not going to compete with WSP and some of these firms with each druther they come up with. But we do, as I said to an infrastructure conference recently, are we really suggesting that we can't convert this station to through running in the 21st century? And I think we're beginning to see a lot of large engineering firms reach out to us because they've seen a little more open mind at this at Amtrak, and certainly with the Andy's appointment, and their idea sharing with us. And none of them are looking at us and saying, oh my God, you absolutely can't do this. You guys are crazy. They're much more in the solution-oriented mode. So I think that 10 years of half information, whack-a-mole, that's ending. And these things can and will all be solved. And in the WSP report, they kept saying how expensive our through-running plan is, but they never gave a number. And I frankly think they should have looked at Kareem's report and said, this is either wrong or here or there. But what they did give was a number. If they did Penn South plus the tunnels out to the river plus those tunnels, it was 60, 70, $80 billion. And the railroads have said the planning can't even start until 2080. That's a non-answer. We need some of the big engineering firms in town to start looking at these questions with a solution orientation. And we know we can get there. And they know we can get there. So that's my answer to that.
Rick, let me just get back to your basic question. I started my career as a geotechnical engineer and started at a firm called Spencer White and Prentice in New York. And their job was to underpin buildings and to do things like you said with the columns. Well, it's basically, to a civil engineer, it's you transfer the load that was going to the column someplace else. And those are not insolvable engineering problems. They might cost something, but in the end, the payback for what it costs is worth it. That's why it's done all the time. It's not a unique problem happening in Penn Station, much as people that might not want through running think it is. It's a common engineering problem in New York. Buildings have to be underpinned, columns have to be moved, walls have to be moved, etc. There are solutions to this. There are solutions that have gone back nearly 100 years. They're tried and true. And there's a number of engineering firms in New York that can carry those out.
So I'm sorry. So the Does Madison Square Garden have to move?
I'll answer that for Kareem and Rethink. We have never said that it has to move. We do think it would be better if it moved. And one question we have thought Andy Byford should look into is what is the cost of leaving it there in terms of the commuting rail experience? It's certainly worthy of the public debate. If it were strictly up to me, I wish that two governors and the president would find a way for it to move, and it would need to be fair to the public and fair to Madison Square Garden. They do own the fee simple. They own the space above the station. So, but I don't think it is going to move. And some people have said you can't do through running with Madison Square Garden in place. They don't seem to think Two Penn Plaza is even there. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's not as emotional as Madison Square Garden, but it can happen with Madison Square Garden there. And my successor architectural affiliate, the Beaux-Arts Atelier, has come up with a station in place plan with Two Penn and Madison Square Garden and with them removed. And the ASTM Halmar group has also done a drawing of shown how they would, their plan is not inconsistent with our plan. In fact, they put a modest improvement in it in terms of a piece of ingress and egress, and I give Luke Bridle on their staff credit for that.
So we're really close to the top of the hour. Can you guys stay late, or should we have one question?
We can stay.
Stay a few minutes, yeah.
So if you want us to be on 5, 10, 15, that's more up to you, but we're here. We're all dressed
Okay.
up with someplace to go.
Well, for those who can't stick around in the audience, thank you again for coming. If you enjoyed this and you want more presentations like this, please go to highspeedrail.us and click the Become a Member button. Even if you are a member, do it again. But thank you to the audience for joining us. And Chris, what kinds of questions do we have?
Yeah, well, we won't be able to get to all of them, but let's get to a few. And right off the top, I mean, if you haven't seen it in the chat, if our speakers haven't seen it in the chat, there's lots of thanks and appreciation for what you've shared. A couple of people have asked about getting the slides. Sam, I know you said that you in advance that you are interested in sharing the slides. If you happen to have a PDF, I think you could probably drop that in the chat right now, or we can post them to our site next week or sometime soon if you would like us to do that.
Kareem, are you going to post them in the chat?
I tried posting the check, but the hyperlinks weren't working. So I'll have to either get the individual links, or I think it might be easier to just share the presentation. But I can send the links also.
We'll figure that out.
We
will figure that out with Chris after the presentation.
Okay.
We'll make sure that you have access to it. We want you to have it.
Great, thank you. And for our audience members who are interested in this, we will have the recording of this talk as well as every other talk that we've ever done, and we can put the whatever links our speakers today would like us to share at hsrail.org/events. We have there's an archive on that page, and that's where this will go as soon as we sort of put the finishing touches on the recording. But a few questions. There were a couple of clarifying questions along the way. The one was the 48 trains an hour that you mentioned under the Hudson a goal only in one direction for a total of 96 total trains per hour, or in both directions?
Kareem?
Yeah, sure. So the railroads have placed a very high priority, and even to be more specific, on peak hour, peak direction, one-seat rides from New Jersey. And Sam alluded to this a little bit in his comment about like the Port Jervis service, but they've kind of taken a lot of the research for this project and a lot of justification going back to ARC studies from the 90s. For those of you who were around for ARC, who weren't rather around for ARC, it was called Access to the Region's Core. And it was a proposal to build 2 additional Hudson River tunnels under the river to connect to a station that ended up being below the basement of Macy's, I believe. And that project ultimately got pulled by Chris Christie, who was governor at the time. And then the reason we're talking about 2 new Hudson tunnels now is a little bit of a different context, which is that after Hurricane Sandy, the existing North River tunnels were damaged and need repairs, and so there was a new sort of urgency to build 2 new tunnels, and therefore the Gateway program and all this. However, a lot of the infrastructure that is proposed for the Gateway program, and we were talking about even like the air shafts for different kinds of maintenance and services, like were literally adopted from ARC. So they're in the exact same place where the tunnel is located, almost exact same place. A couple of changes due to post Sandy and the Hudson Yards development, but a lot of that prioritization of where the service comes from is inherited from that project. If we remember when I was mentioning the 35% increase in the half-through running station that the railroads presented in 2021, in that proposal, the amount of Hudson River service was, if you were to only count the Hudson River service and not the Long Island Railroad service, it was closer to high 20s, I believe. And then it was maybe like 5 or 6% additional from Long Island Railroad. And when the railroads were talking about it in their presentation, they referred to it as like, oh, it's like getting almost half of the service that a terminal would get. And someone said, wait, no, but doesn't Long Island Railroad get more service? And it didn't seem like that was in their calculations or in their priorities at all. And that's something we've been pushing back on, is in a lot of the calculations of how many trains per hour Rethink's plan could achieve in a renovated Penn Station. There's a lot of policy issues. So you could say, you know, you can't get to 48 trains an hour. Well, what if I had a different service pattern? And so service is definitely something we are trying to push an independent review to revisit, as opposed to being like very married to this 48 trains per hour from New Jersey.
Okay, thanks. Another factual question, the cost that was mentioned for Penn South, did that include the value of the air rights?
That includes the value of the land. So the proposal is not to purchase air rights from other places. It was to purchase the land itself, and then that land would be able to be developed at different points. This project's been going on since Andrew Cuomo was governor, and so it went through a lot of different iterations, but at different points there was proposals to give additional development rights or zoning bonuses to those lots as kind of a special district. And so those would be able to be towers, but I wouldn't say it's accurate to say that they're buying zoning rights or air rights. It's more accurate to say they bought the land, and the land is currently under even under current zoning conditions, could be built up a lot more.
And Kareem was more conservative than I am, and he didn't highlight a note I put on those cost slides, but their cost of Penn South appears to have gone up almost double. They're talking about different platform configurations, and it may go as high as $17 billion based on some investigative journalism work that Nolan Hicks did, that he's provided the internal document, so it's pretty reliable. So we think that is, you know, an infrastructure money pit.
Okay, thanks. Chaitanya says, thanks for this presentation, and says that a great example of through running closer to home is in Philadelphia, and then asks, is there anything we can learn from Pennsylvania regarding through running within our, you know, the American legal and political framework?
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that was actually one of the first examples we looked to here. And Dr. Vukan Vucic, who Dr. Paswell mentioned earlier, whose wife has just passed, we consulted with him thoroughly in the early phases of this project and kind of learned lessons with him. And we worked with his assistant, Mubin Chow, on some of these phasing documents and operational models.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we went straight to the source.
These phasing documents have been looked at by a lot of different rail and senior engineering firms, and have been, I just have to throw some kudos to Kareem, because they were done before I became affiliated with the organization, but they are given an enormous amount of credit. One engineering firm we talked to recently offered Kareem a job at the end of the presentation, which didn't make me very happy that we'd given them the given them the time, but it was okay, you know, but these are strong documents.
Great, thanks. Greg says contractors tend to like 2 or 3 year jobs. How long do you envision construction taking?
I have never met I'm a practicing registered architect in New York. I have never met a contractor who said no to a longer job. Um, so uh, and particularly not a large infrastructure project. Um, I would say that all of the infrastructure projects, including the Hudson River tunnels, which I believe the contracts have been released and they've started construction on some of that, and other infrastructure in New Jersey, um, Gateway itself, no matter what we do, just by virtue of the tunnels, is at least a 7-year project. In our phasing plan, we have it broken out into about 10 phases. In the third of those phases, at the end of the third phase is when through running operations can start. So we phased in such a way where if you do it in the order that we're suggesting or something akin to it, you wouldn't have to wait till the end of the project to be able to start getting that through running service. You'd be able to start getting it maybe 18 or 24 months in. So maybe that contractor we can start seeing the fruits of their labor after 2 years. But it would get increasingly better until the project's done.
Okay, thanks. And let's wrap up with a few questions about governance and the politics of this. Preston says Paris and London have centralized control of their services that run through their city centers. New York doesn't have a unified rail system. How does your plan attempt to align differing state governance structures on both sides of the Hudson to operate through running? And then Johan asked a related question to you. Does the federal government need to force the New York area railroads to cooperate or even join into one agency as the solution?
The answers to all of those is yes. No, I mean, look, I don't mean to be flip. Jim Venturi, who from Rethink Studio, we're really working towards a governance proposal, and there's a person, Tim, his last name escapes me. He's with the Effective Transit Alliance, has also done a lot of work on governance, but it is one of the big problems that we have here. And one of the first things we said when Andy Byford was appointed is they should all be thinking about a prototype for this type of a project going forward and try to build a playbook out of it. They're going to have to do that while the train car is driving 60 miles an hour or 83 miles per hour, but it certainly is something that's needed. The Port Authority, for instance, their jurisdiction actually is not as deep into the region as we think it needs to be. The rail lines go much further than the Port Authority's jurisdiction. So we definitely think it has to happen, but there was a certain point in this where people seem to be proffering that as, look, we can fix that later and we'll just do Penn South and let's get this done and not do anything to tempt fate with the Gateway tunnels. And we didn't think that was acceptable. We wholeheartedly endorse the Gateway tunnels. We wholeheartedly endorse through running, and we think that there should be some thoughts to prototype about governance, even if they have to incite 2 or 3 people to ride along and try and build this while we go, but we should do some lessons learned and figured it out. The Port Authority bus terminal project, while we would have preferred a rail solution, at least in terms of in the late phases of the project, perhaps with Rick Cotton's involvement, in terms of using independent peer review and not sidestepping ULURP or the environmental regulations. They seem to, in the last innings of that project, found a good formula for getting these done. But I think it starts with a strong leader at top like Rick Cotton. We're hoping Andy Byford can bring some of the same to this situation. And I think the feds do need to be involved with this. This involves the whole region, and it's one of the most important economic engines in the country. We all like to say it is the economic engine in the country, but I'm not going to say that to a couple of people from Chicago. So, we think it is worthy of the federal involvement, and everybody's going to have to check their ego at the door, and we're all going to have to try and help Andy with this. And Cesar, who's with the Rethink Studio, probably has some more thoughts on that, and I'll let him go. Go ahead, Cesar.
Yeah, I would just like to say that everything Sam said is good and necessary, and we do need governance reform. And the big reason why we would need that type of reform is because we just simply need projects that have bigger scopes so that we're always planning for the whole region as a whole. But on a more immediate scale, you don't actually need a full merging of agencies to accomplish the objectives of through running at Penn Station. I think one example is to look at Paris when they did the RER. There were a lot of obstacles getting the SNCF, which was the national agency, to play along with RATB, which was within the city of Paris. And they had to do things like shuffle which side of the car the conductors worked in, different signaling standards, various operational procedures, et cetera, et cetera. But they managed, like these these were real issues that they had to deal with, but they were all surmountable. And if you have a strong incentive for cooperation, the agencies can do it. And for good through running operation, you don't need a full agency merger. But for longer term planning, yes, I think governance reform is necessary.
In terms of the size of the region, you know, the old New Yorker poster where you look west of the Hudson and everything's sort of compressed. I've been thinking about getting one of our graphics people to do that, but have it start at the Musconetcong River in western New Jersey and maybe one of the rivers out on Long Island or up in Connecticut. But London expanded its jurisdiction in the 60s. We kind of stopped that in 1898 with Greater New York. And yes, it's a multi-state situation, but we're going to need to get past that. And that's why I mentioned all those famous people from Paterson. We don't necessarily think of them as New Jersey folks. I mean, do you think of Allen Ginsberg as a New Jersey person or as a New York person? We really are one region. We have to somehow politically start thinking that way more. And I am realistic. I realize what happened with Governor Christie way back when and how these things can go haywire. I've lived here all my life, but I think we need to get above that. And Jim Venturi would point out to you that the person who wrote the jingle "I Love New York" was from northern New Jersey.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I might one of the original barriers to this integration. And I've worked on a lot of organizational rules and through major organizations. One of the original barriers was basically how are you going to share the revenue if the LIRR is running over NJT tracks, you know, who gets the revenue for that ride, et cetera. And those are things that can be readily solved because we have computers now and we know what a ticket says and we know how much time a person spends on each one. So that barrier is over. Then there are operating rules, perhaps there are different operating rules. You get together with the unions, you close the doors and get in a room and say, here are the incentives to get a package that looks like A, B, and C. And if necessary, here are some first year bonuses for everyone to make it work smoothly and move it on. It can be done. It takes a strong governor to want to see it done and to shake heads, or two governors, New York and New Jersey, and to shake some heads and say, you're going to sit in that room until this is done, because the economic advantage of having this intercity, interregional rail system far outweighs a slight difference in operating or size of crew or time, or do we know what the fares are, et cetera. As I said, in Japan, the person just holds up their phone, where do I want to go and how am I going to get there? And it's all there. We could do that here too, believe it or not, because we know computers, and certainly everyone under the age of 20 knows how to use a phone. So the barriers are, a lot of them are self-made or they're magnified by political grandstanding, and we have to get around that.
All right. Well, and speaking of governors and continuing in the political vein, we'll give the last question to Richard, who says, I realize that the governor will have a major say, but mayoral support is important too. Have either of the leading New York mayoral candidates given a position on through running?
Well, I'm not sure I know who the leading mayoral candidates are. Mr. Mondami, Kareem has some access to him. And I think that if you look at our presentation and the fact that we are not going to be demolishing affordable housing in order to accomplish what we want to do, and it would be more cost effective I think there are any number of reasons that he would be able to align with us, and certainly the local electeds that I mentioned earlier are aligned with us. So the Adams administration, if he's one of the leading mayoral candidates, he has not been that engaged or involved. His city planning commission person sits on the Station Working Advisory Group Committee, but I think as this is emerging, and particularly with Andy Byford's involvement, I think you're going to see more support and less contention. And Andy said at our event that he plans to bring a little British diplomacy to things.
All right. Well, on that note, let's call it a day. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Sam, Buzz, Karim, Cesar for giving such a great presentation today. Rick, any final thoughts? Oh, you're unmuted, or you're muted.
I'm sorry. So I've muted today because our air conditioning is out. So I've got the door to the hallway open. But thank you very much for this presentation. Really appreciate all this work. It's really important that we get this right for New York, but all of these issues exist in Chicago and in Washington at least. So any solutions that you have help fix things around the country as well. So again, thank you so much for your efforts. We will send around links to the materials in an overview and post this video. And then I'll have links to how to reach you guys. And then for the audience, thank you very much for your interest in great trains. Again, if you liked this presentation, if you want to continue having these kinds of presentations, please go to highspeedrail.us and make a donation. Thanks again, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.